voice to this conversation. The LGBTQ movement has been the most successful movement since the Civil Rights Movement in really thinking about how we reshape public opinion and advance affirmative rights for American citizens. Talk to us about how you were able to change the court of opinion, you know, advance wins at the courthouse, the state house, and in the public opinions and hearts and minds of Americans to be able to advance marriage equality in a much shorter time frame than initially. I think, you know, there was a memo that was recently released about the LGBT movement thought for how long it would take to get marriage equality, and they set it at a 15 to 25-year benchmark, but instead we're able to achieve it, you know, in 10 or less. Talk to us about what lessons you can share from that movement and in order to be able to build a campaign to win, because I think those are some of the lessons we need to be able to hear in this voting rights movement as we've been continuing to push forward for kind of this meta policy of automatic registration.
Thanks, Nora, and thanks for starting us on time. I run the annual national conference for the National LGBTQ Task Force, Creating Change, and so I am really wedded to sessions starting and ending on time. And thank you all for being here. It's great to have so many folks in the room for the first session, the first time slot of the conference, so thank you for being here. So let's see, how many of us in the room would rather eat burning hot coals than miss voting in an election that you are qualified to vote in? How many are habitual voters? You never miss. Thank you. I'm trying to tell my kids about this.
Good luck with that.
We have a suggestion.
Okay. Thank you. I need some. So the right to vote is obviously foundational to the democracy, and it's a right that has not been available to everyone at all times, obviously, as we know from our history. For LGBTQ people, we have faced, as voting restrictions have been brought into place and enacted in different locales, we have faced some particular challenges that I just want to share with you a little bit about that. Our community is incredibly diverse by race, by gender, by socioeconomic capacity, by education, by employment. We are everybody. So when these voter restrictions come into place, we are also particularly affected. LGBTQ people are more likely to be living in poverty, particularly when we consider lesbians, bisexual women, and trans women and trans men. There's some myth about the incredible economic power of the gay community. Let me share with you that refers actually to gay white men who have professional jobs, right? And are business people. Most of us do not have that kind of economic power. Transgender people are four times more likely to be living at an annual income of $10,000 or less. So we live in poverty. When it comes to valid voter ID, 27% of transgender folks don't have a valid photo ID that matches their gender, name, and name that might be on the voter roll. 18% of seniors don't have it. 15% of low-income people don't have it. 25% of African Americans don't have this valid photo ID. When we talk about residency requirements, obviously that's a barrier for students and for homeless people. Talking about what it means for a disabled person to be able to vote if there is restricted access to polling places are moved, there's limited assistance at polling places. That is obviously a problem for them. 30% of people with disabilities experienced some difficulty at the polling places during the 2012 election. So the National LGBTQ Task Force will, in the next month, let's see today, which is July and August, will launch something called Queer the Vote. It is a nationwide project to we're actually relaunching the Clear the Vote campaign to provide people with information and support so that in the next round of elections, more of us will be not just ready to vote, but also able to vote. And shortly we'll be actually launching the LGBTQ voting rights toolkit. So, if this is of interest to you, I invite you to check it out. But I'm not really here to talk about voting rights. I'm here to talk about a glorious victory on June 26, 2015. And you know, it just is so amusing to me when people say, wow, how did that Supreme Court decision in Obergefell happen? How did you do this so fast? And how did you, that was like a miracle. And I have to sit back and think, well, actually, it wasn't a miracle at all. The issue of access to marriage and Indian discrimination as relates to marriage licensing has been a matter of conversation and a matter of court battles and then later legislative battles within the LGBT community since 1970 or earlier. So, is that 46 years? 45 years? My math is terrible. But for decades, actually, people have been working on this. And if you have an interest in sort of seeing how it went, there's a very excellent timeline on the marriage equality movement at an organization's website called Freedom to Marry. I was looking at it this morning as I was thinking about this panel today, and I was reminded of how much push and pull and back and forth and one step forward, 3 steps back that happened in this process. So, I want to tell you 2 things. First, we were losers. Losers. We lost repeatedly on the issue of marriage until we finally started to win in about the mid-2000s, until we finally started to win when Massachusetts, my home state, began to allow same-sex couples to marry in May 2004. But let me share with you that that issue in Massachusetts was not resolved until June 2007, because we engaged in a 3-year campaign to protect the right to marry in Massachusetts. Here's the other thing I want to share with you. One of the reasons that this issue moved in terms of public opinion so quickly is that it is not fundamentally a challenge to power. It is a challenge to people's cultural views and religious views. But this is not fundamentally a challenge to the established powers in the United States. It is not a challenge to capitalism. It is not a challenge to racism. It is not a challenge to police violence. It is not a challenge to the NSA. It is not a challenge to the Congress of the United States. So, one of the reasons we were able to win is that this issue is literally an equality issue. We just want to be treated like everybody else. And we are not asking that treatment to change. We just want to be included in this institution of marriage, which I'm sure will not come as a surprise to you. The institution itself is quite contested. And its value is contested. But the other piece that's very important here is that like many people who are queer, I grew up in a family that was headed by a heterosexual couple. I have 6 brothers and sisters. They're all straight. But when it came to their understanding of this issue and why I would want to marry my girlfriend of 30 years, why I would want that, it was not a big leap for them, although they did say, don't expect that much sex. I'm glad to report that hasn't changed that. But we come from families. We come from families where marriage is a cultural norm. And our family members, while some of them may have felt like, are you kidding me? 2 women can't get married, 2 men can't get married. After a while, that notion in people's minds changes. And they start thinking, well, actually, why can't my sister get married? Why can't my son marry the person that he loves? I married the person I love. I think maybe actually we could take this step forward as a culture, as a community, as a nation, as a people, and let these folks have the access to the institutions that the rest of us have. So it's not much of a challenge, and family members have been very involved from the get-go. So there was a simple plan that was put out in the mid-90s by a man named Evan Wolfson, who runs this organization called Freedom Today, which, by the way, is going out of business. They won. It was a very simple plan. It was 3 steps. Win more states so that a majority of Americans would live in a marriage state. And in doing that, grow public support for marriage equality to greater than 60%. And then, via the Supreme Court, having created a very good climate for a good outcome, bring forward a pretty unassailable case to the United States Supreme Court. So that's simple, but it wasn't easy. And it took a long time. I did say we were losers before we were winners, right? So if you just look at the history of...
And Maggie, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to make sure we get time for questioning, so if you want to...
Yep, okay. If you look at the history of ballot questions regarding LGBTQ people, prior to 2012, we lost almost every one of them.
Yeah.
We were 75% losers before 2012. And then in 2012, there were 4 ballot questions on same-sex marriage in 4 states: Minnesota, Maryland, Maine, and the outlier, Washington State. I could say Mashington State, and that would everybody an M name. But there were 4, and we won all of them. And it is those campaigns, I think, that really bring forward some good lessons for organizers, whether you are working on ballot question campaigns or legislative campaigns. And here they are. Losing creates change. So what we learned is that even when we lost, we had a greater number of people trained and ready to go the next time. We had built better, stronger infrastructure. We had more data about voters than we had had before. Our technology and our savvy went up. Voters came to know LGBTQ people because we knocked on their doors over and over and over and over. And we had increased numbers of key endorsements from the grass tops. That's lesson number 1. Losing means you're going to win later. Number 2, we changed the message on marriage. We went from, this is a constitutional right, and we need the rights and benefits and obligations of marriage to protect our families. We went from that to highlighting the love and commitment of couples. And that's where we won our families. That's where we won our families, and our families helped us win everybody else. So we went from head to heart. But we retained the value, the fundamental value, that same-sex couples deserve and have a right to the protections that come from being in a marriage. So we we hung on to the value that we deserve protection of the law. But in changing that message, we mobilized millions of us to tell our own stories. We had campaigns for marriage conversation at the family Thanksgiving table. We had campaigns for people to take it home over the holidays. We sent same-sex couples with or without children in to see legislators, to knock on doors, to go to meetings, to go to churches, to go to neighborhood groups, to go to the Rotary Club, to go to stand up in their congregations, and to speak about their lives, and to speak about the value of their lives and the value of their families.
And it's a really good
story.
It's a really good point. I don't want to cut you off, but I want to also make sure we bring it back a little bit, both to the voting conversation and also to allow the audience to speak. So I'm going to just, if I could, piggyback on that question of like making the messaging